There we go. Agile software development. Unfortunately, I'm teaching agile software development, but one day I'm wearing my great big winter boots, so I'm maybe not as quick on my feet as I could be. But, you know, I'm also just kind of sore from shoveling, so I'll keep jumping around to a minimum. So, agile. I will preface this by saying, when you look at job descriptions, every once in a while, you will see phrases in there like, should be or must be familiar with agile development practices. Right? So here we go. Right? After this, you should be at least able to claim some familiarity with agile. You will at least have heard of it in principle, even if you've never worked in an agile environment. So, agile is one of the most key practices in modern software development. Okay, I'm just going to back up a little bit on agile right now, okay? This is basically the way things worked. This was like the main model that you wanted from, like, say, the year 2000 to the year 2020-ish, or maybe a bit before that. What you're looking at now is called DevOps, right? So DevOps integrates some ideas from Agile, but in some circles, DevOps is considered to be a successor methodology to Agile. So, you guys know what DevOps stands for and means? Anybody?
Developer operations?
Yes, development and operations. So, the idea, generally speaking, a DevOps role combines the functionality of a software developer, a la all of you, with roles that you might typically associate with a network administrator, such as people in the sister program, right? So, a DevOps person has to know how to manage and distribute virtual machines, how to comb through dev logs. They need to do some scripting similar to what we did earlier in this course, right? In addition to doing all of the software development related stuff, right? So you're kind of like a whole package type deal. There's a heavy emphasis in DevOps on automating processes. So, but that being said, I would say that DevOps is an iteration on, it's an evolution from Agile, in a way that Agile was kind of not an evolution of its predecessor, as we're going to see. Okay, so far so good? Any questions? All right, so Agile is one of the most key practices in modern software development. You'll still see plenty of people talking about Agile, though. Agile software development is also one of the most commonly used and misunderstood terms in the software industry. We will try to give some context of what it means, or should mean. Agile, lots of things are kind of used in different ways by different people. Even the term DevOps means different, quite different things to different people. Although there are kind of a couple of key technologies that it's not DevOps without those. Agile is an umbrella term for a set of principles and practices, but it is not equivalent with popular Agile processes such as Scrum. Scrum is the process that we're going to focus on in this talk. So, Agile practices include requirements discovery and solutions improvement through collaborative effort, the collaborative effort and self-organizing and cross-functional teams with their customers and end users. That clunky chunk of text is the Wikipedia definition. So let's break that down a little bit. So we are discovering requirements by talking to customers. Please discover your requirements by talking to customers. They aren't always good at knowing what they want, but they're the best you have, so talk to them, right? Through the collaborative effort of self-organizing and cross-functional teams. What does that mean? Agile attempts to flatten the hierarchy, right? In an ideal scenario, on an agile development team, there are not senior devs or junior devs or bosses. There are just devs, all working and all organizing together, all contributing and collaborating together. Now, is this, a bit naive? Perhaps, but it's the principle upon which it's been organized. Agile was popularized by the 2001. Back then we used to call it 2001. Manifesto for Agile Software Development. How many people are younger than Agile software development? You don't have to answer that. Occasionally. Written by developers attending a resort in Utah. So there you go. So we are talking about project organization, right? We are talking about, you guys take a course in project organization at some point, right? Yeah. Did they talk about Agile there? Yeah? Good! How redundant has this been so far? A little bit? Yeah, okay. Well, I must teach it. And so I shall teach it. So, maybe there's something in here that you didn't hear before. So, Agile values individuals and interactions over processes and tools. This is in contrast to DevOps, which certainly prioritizes processes and tools over people and interactions. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Responding to changes over following a plan. So, over does not mean exclusively over. Just because we are considering working software to be preferred over comprehensive documentation does not mean that we do not write comments, and it does not mean that we do not document what we are doing. It does not mean that we do not seek our requirements before we start working. It does not mean that we do not do design work before we start putting pen to paper. It is more important to have working software than comprehensive documentation, but that does not mean that documentation is not important or that we should not have it. In situations with limited resources, which are all situations, right? If we did not have limited resources, we would literally be deities, right? In situations with limited resources, we should show a preference towards the software working over it being well documented. We can apply this same line of thinking to the rest of Agile values as well. Agile has a history of being misinterpreted as enabling cowboy coding or hacking things together. In fact, You know, the word hack used to be a pejorative term, right? These days, everybody aspires to be a hacker. Everybody goes to hackathons where you hack. You learn to hack. But, you know, back in the past, in the olden times, a hacker was someone who, you know, was like inelegant in their use of the knife, shall we say. The intentions of the authors were to tilt the balance between these variables. Process and methodology still matters, but individuals and interactions must be prioritized. So, Agile is basically a response to the software development model that was common in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which is generally called the waterfall method. Did they discuss the waterfall method with you in your project management course? Good. Did they discuss DevOps with you in your project management course? Okay, good.
Less than the other two, waterfall and agile were main.
Okay. We need to get with the program. So, we can apply the same line of thinking to the rest of Agile values as well. Oh wait, I did this already. Sorry. Boop. There we go. Agile development principles. 1. Customer satisfaction by early and continuous delivery of valuable software. This is something DevOps has maintained. 2. Welcoming changing requirements, even in late development. For a sort of seasoned software developer, I'm not very seasoned, but I've been seasoned a little bit. I won't tell you what the seasoning was, but it was my thesis. That kind of raises red flags for me. It's like, yeah, don't try not to change the requirements too late into the project. It's a recipe for disaster. Welcoming it is like, you have to have a very good understanding of what is possible and what is not possible and how much effort it will be. Delivering software frequently, weeks rather than months, or perhaps even a nightly build, hey? Close daily cooperation between business people and developers. Projects are built around motivated individuals who should be trusted, as opposed to the kind of, micromanaging kind of, this is what you're working on today, Jenkins, right? Sort of it hopefully prevents management from becoming intrusive in the amount of micromanaging that they're doing and preventing the creative exercise, which is programming, right? The general observation here is that programmers, when they're good, are usually best left to their own devices, right? Face-to-face conversation is the best form of communication, co-location. This is something that I think has also kind of been falling off the map as time goes on. I think a lot of people are going into software now because they expect to be able to work from home. Not as much these days. Working software is the primary measure of progress. I guess that's fair enough. Sustainable development, able to maintain a constant pace. So, would you like to know a software industry that has very, very bad development practices in that respect? Anybody care to guess?
Sure.
It's video games. If you can avoid it, don't become a video game developer, because there's a very strong culture in video game development of crunch periods. A crunch period is basically, however long they can force you to work 80 hours a week is basically what a crunch period is. And, you know, stories of developer burnout from having worked in the game industry are myriad. They are legion, for they are many. And it's just bad. It's bad over there. I don't know why anybody would want to, like, you have to really like video games to work as a video game developer, and like even then, it's probably not something you want to do for your whole life, right? That's kind of like the other thing is like, sometimes you see software people, it's like, well, I can destroy myself in my 20s and maybe retire by my mid-30s, and then I'm retired. This occasionally works out, but you know, it also, like, you're investing a lot of confidence in your own skills, let's just say. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design. Sure. Simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work done is essential. I kind of feel like I'm reading, like, The Art of War or something. Best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Again, try to get, like, what does your average manager know about how software architecture should be put together? All right? They will have done an MBA, most likely, unless they also were a software developer at some point, which would be great, but is often not the case. Unfortunately, your manager may also be a normie. I know that, you know, that's the case for me at the moment in our faculty, and like, I love the AD, he's great, and he's had our backs in some pretty difficult situations, but he's not a programmer, so he doesn't quite get programming, you know? But, you know, I always say there's a very specific type of brain damage that you need in order to be a programmer, so. Regularly, the team reflects on how to become more effective and adjusts accordingly. So that's partially what's meant by self-organizing. During the 80s and 90s, a number of new software development practices emerged. The Agile Manifesto, in some respects, provides a general set of values and principles that describe the common elements that made these practices effective. This is why we say Agile is an umbrella term for a set of principles and practices. It gets a lot of the credit and blame for things people were already doing and continued to do after the manifesto. So it's not like, you know, it's not like the manifesto comes out and like through the force of like some governmental law, all software companies must now follow this in the same way, right? The processes which we now describe as agile were developed in response to the traditional model of software development. The traditional model of software development, which is the waterfall method. Like agile, waterfall is truly a collection of principles and practices and can be done in different ways. There are technically other models as well, but these are the big two that are often contrasted. Waterfall methods are heavyweight and sequential. Agile, lightweight, and virtually/practically always iterative. So, a classical project management you guys probably already know this. You guys already know this? This list of things? Yeah? Okay. Often each part of the life cycle would be managed by a different team. You can imagine that produces conflicts and miscommunications. Despite problems, it's worth noting that it did work, and it can still work well in some situations, right? It's not dead. Sometimes this is the way that you want to go. You guys know what safety critical software is? So let me give you a few software applications, all right? some typical examples. Software that goes into an aeroplane, right? If the software in the airplane fails, the plane could crash, depending on what the software is. If the so it has a very, very high standard for that it needs to meet for reliability, right? Same thing with software that goes into ground vehicles. Did you know that the average car has over 100 computers in it now? If you count like little microcontroller chips, right? Each one of them are running programs, often C programs. These also need to have very high standards for reliability or else, right? The code that goes into nuclear power plants, the code that goes into medical devices and technology, many industrial processes are subject to a very high level of very highly stable software is required for them. There's a whole class of applications out there that fall into this category where like a more formal process for software is definitely required, right? Often in such cases, requirements are even expressed in the forms of mathematical formula, right? Verification sometimes means verifying against the mathematical formulas of the requirements, right? There's a whole host of industries that operate along these lines. But here, we're kind of training you to be web devs, so web development isn't really safety critical, right? Yes. Oh, yes. Software that goes into killer robots is also safety critical. The biggest problem with the waterfall method is that it is predictive. You need to have a very thorough understanding of the requirements of the software in order to be able to do the design right. You need to do the design very well in order to be able to do the implementation, and so on and so forth. This is probably appropriate if you're designing software for the instrumentation of an airplane, but probably less applicable if you're designing a website for customers, right? Yes. So, yes. In practice, it can be very difficult to predict everything up front. The unknowns are unknown a lot of the time. So, we may use risk analysis to choose between agile development and waterfall methods. If a project's requirements change frequently, this favors agile, especially if you're trying to please people. People are notoriously fickle. However, if you're trying to, please a gyroscope, then, the gyroscope's requirements are going to change a lot less frequently than a person's, right? Smaller and less hierarchical teams with lots of experienced developers may do better with agile. Larger and more hierarchical teams with more junior developers may do better with waterfall. So in waterfall, everything is more strongly prescribed, which makes it easier for people who don't know what they're doing, right? Or know little about what they're doing. These are generalities that may guide the decision of what to use, but they are not hard and fast rules. By contrast, agile is considered an adaptive practice. Milestones are reached, but the path to them is not determined at the outset. Path is determined as milestones are met. Milestones themselves may be altered, new ones added at specific points in the process. Agile methods are not required to be iterative, but are very frequently iterative. All of this helps to better handle unknown unknowns. As work is done, learning occurs, and this learning guides future decision making. So, Agile includes many different methodologies and practices: rapid application development, the unified process. Ooh, stay away from that one. Anything that claims to be unified and isn't is just a recipe for disaster. Just like the the universal modeling language, right? I hate UML. It's the worst thing ever. If it's universal, then why are there 10 of them? Right? Dynamic systems development method. Sure. Scrum is the one we're going to see an example of. Is this, by the way, the one they did, did they do Scrum in the course that you took? Oh boy. Alright. Extreme programming, and the always popular etc. method. In order to have anything published into the etc. folder of a Linux distribution, it must be developed by the etc. method. That's not true. That was a joke. So, what do they all have in common? Well, they all have communication between people, although I would say that's probably also true of the waterfall method. Simplified documentation. This is a big emphasis versus the waterfall method. Waterfall tends to have very strongly rigorous design documents that hang around for years and years and years. Working closely with customers. Part of the purpose of having extremely rigorous documentation is so that you don't have to bother the customer quite so much. Able to respond to change. It's a big problem if you have a gigantic design document and a gigantic requirements document and you need any changes. That requires review by several engineers, probably. Avoid unnecessary work. Good life advice. Not always good life advice, though. Sometimes, if you consider yourself, in a position of, lifting weights at the gym, that's, definitionally unnecessary work, and yet you do it for, health-related reasons. I kind of quibble with this one, it's only by doing unnecessary work that you improve, right? So, at the moment, if you consider, doing your school assignments yourself instead of getting the chat algorithm to do them is unnecessary work. It is only the people who are doing the unnecessary work who will be able to hold down jobs in the future, right? Promote horizontal hierarchies. That is an oxymoron. Have you guys heard the term oxymoron? No? Okay. An oxymoron is a contradiction. It's when two terms that are a compound word contradict each other. For example, Army intelligence.
Army intelligence?
Army intelligence, yeah.
Okay.
Traditional waterfall methods make use of independent teams who communicated mainly through formal documentation. Agile methods make use of a single, focused team. Agile does not refer to iterative development, though it is frequently iterative. Just because you're doing iterative development does not mean that you're following agile practices. It also does not refer to ad hoc development, although poorly done agile will look like ad hoc development. In fact, I would personally, I may be a bit of a classicist, I would think that agile would have to work pretty hard to not look like ad hoc development. Agile does refer to a system designed for developers and projects rather than conforming to hierarchical structures. This leads to the main difference between classical and agile projects. Classical project management often emphasizes the process. We attempt to complete whole projects in one go. Multiple teams based on specialties with varying concerns are all talking to each other. Teams are guided by managers. Agile project management tries to emphasize the product. Work using just enough information for a feature. Single team based on project needs. Teams are guided by project needs. So, it's not, I'm doing this because the documentation says we need this. It's, I'm doing this because the customer said they wanted this feature. Right? Bringing us to Scrum. Most commonly used process in industry is Scrum. Some terms you may recognize. Product owner, Scrum master, sprint, and backlog. Sprint sounds an awful lot like crunch to me. We will stick with these terms for consistency, but every company implements slightly different terminology, schedules, and artifacts. People all have their own way of doing things. So when you covered this, how long, for what period of time did you guys cover agile development? Was it weeks? Did you spend weeks on this? No? Can't recall? Okay, maybe it's good to review it then. Okay, so Scrum is an agile project management system used in software development and in other industries. Software is developed through a series of incremental development sprints. The product backlog is a to-do list of work to be done on the project. Sprints are a period of time no more than 1 month, but typically 1 to 2 weeks, hopefully, in which a releasable increment of the project is developed. Here's your Scrum big picture, right? We have our product backlog. Items are selected from the product backlog and put into the sprint backlog. The sprint is then the develop. Work on the backlog, work on the backlog, work on the backlog. Then you get a working increment of the software. Version 7.3.2, for example. So, part of the problem with this model of development is that it is still somewhat centralized. There's a chair in there. There we go. If you consider what's possible with Git and forks of repositories, you can have many people working on their own branch, and these features can be integrated into the main branch on an ongoing basis. When the features are done, you don't have to have a set amount of time that you're working on the code, and then at the end there's one finished product. The product can be iteratively improved at a much finer time scale, right? You can have a thing like nightly builds, right? If you have a team of 30 developers and each one is working on their own feature, and your each one produces one pull request per month, you've still got one update per day, right? As opposed to clumping it all at the end. So this favors more major, larger updates, right? The product owner liaises with stakeholders and the development team. The product owner becomes the voice of the customer to the development team, responsible for the ultimate business results, manages the product backlog, and may cancel a sprint in rare cases. we're on completely the wrong track, team. We gotta draw it back to the drawing board. The Scrum leader leads the team through the Scrum processing, educating the team on the process. Helps with backlog management and communication. Not a project manager. The idea is that the team should be more self-organizing. The development team includes developers, testers, and architects. So notice here, testers are integrated into the development team, right? In a lot of places you have the testing department. That's kind of more of a waterfall type thing where you can just say, okay, like verification stage, send it off to the testers, right? A sprint planning meeting is held at the beginning of each sprint. The sprint planning meeting is a goal, at it, a goal is determined. Which items on the backlog are required to meet the goal is also determined. A daily Scrum meeting of no more than 15 minutes, where developers update on progress, challenges, and further goals. So, at the beginning of the workday, all of the devs get together, and you're like, hi, I'm Nick. Hi, Nick. This is what I did yesterday. And you say what you did yesterday. These are sometimes done standing up to discourage people from getting comfortable. Any discussion to address changes can be done with a smaller team, typically right after the daily Scrum meeting. So, you know, if it's like, I did this, I have a problem with that. Not right now, you don't. We're going to talk about that afterwards. With only the people who are interested or relevant. A sprint review meeting takes place at the end of the sprint and involves the team sharing the work completed with the stakeholders. Expectations and upcoming plans may be discussed. It's like, okay, stakeholders, we got this done for you this month. It's like, oh, well, that's very, very nice, thank you. A sprint retrospective meeting takes place internally among the team, intended to analyze the effectiveness of the sprint and possible areas for improvement. Jenkins doesn't comment his code. It took me too long to read his bloody code. Well, I would comment my code if you stopped using assignment inside of if statements. This is the type of conversation I imagine they have. It's like, why aren't we using Rust, guys? Shut up! By the way, up-and-coming languages that you might want to get on the train for, I would definitely put Rust on that list. Like, I'm hearing more and more, like, Rust is a language people are using for real things. Like, I'm hearing, like, quite a lot about, like, server backends that are being done in Rust now. So, Rust, it's a hard friggin' language, though. So, yeah. But I think if you want a cool and interesting language that's interesting to learn, and probably, like, there are currently jobs for Rust developers, right? And, like, you know, because of the kind of the nature of the college system, we can only really teach you, like, the big popular languages, or in the case of PHP, but like, I recommend Rust. I recommend it because, like, it's gonna blow stuff up in the future. It's gonna be the new C++, basically. It might already be the new C++, actually. So I recommend Rust. All right, diagram. This is a rectangle. This is a loopity-loop with some arrows. These are a lot of happy people, but they don't have faces. This is your product backlog. The product owner speaks to the stakeholders. We then forecast the work needed to achieve the sprint goal by the developer team. This is the sprint planning. We then use the sprint backlog. That's all of the things that we decided we need to do to achieve the goal, right? We then iterative incremental development. Daily Scrum is a little thing inside of it. But we work, and whoop, we get a potentially releasable increment. But it's got to be reviewed and retrospectivized. Make sense? All of the things I said previously, but on a diagram with arrows. Here's the problem. Almost every company tries to use the same basic process, but it's not optimizable. I wouldn't say optimizable, I'd say optimal here. It's not optimal for all projects. Some projects work best as waterfall, some as Scrum, some as extreme programming, which by the way is not discussed in this set of slides. Did they discuss extreme programming with you guys in your project management course? No? Okay, maybe that's what the slide should be about then. Corporate approaches remove agile advantages. So, what's the problem with this manager-free paradise that the developers are trying to create for themselves? That's right, it's when management gets involved. Agile approach is a reaction against corporate structure. Members of a Scrum team may still belong to distinct corporate entities. For example, the Scrum main person is often a manager or has some other leadership role, in which case it defeats the whole point. The whole point is to have a flat hierarchy. If you're inserting people into the flat hierarchy who are not in the flat hierarchy, then you have destroyed it. You have reintroduced the pyramid. Agile is also used as an excuse to cut corners. We don't need documentation. All of these quotes are the little devil that's sitting on your shoulder, okay? We don't need documentation. But otherwise people won't understand what we're saying. We're in a hurry, proper design can wait. But if we don't design it properly now, we'll cause ourselves more work in the future. Test plans are too cumbersome. But how are we to test it if we don't have a plan to test it? What about other developers? Most projects go through their highs and lows of development work. I can tell you one about that one. So it may be known to you that I have a couple of games on Steam, right? One of them is a pinball game, and I'll tell you about a development low right there. The bloody menu system, right? Like, it's not at all the fun part of the project. It needs a menu system, right? And like, good grief, I got pulled through the ringer on that because like I couldn't like remap the controls. I had nothing for that in the menu because that's actually like a non-trivial problem if you're using, an old version of Unity to do it, right? And like the button remapping, I was getting killed on reviews and it's like, but in every pinball game that's ever been made, the two shift keys are the two flippers. What are you talking about? You want different buttons. It's like, activate sticky keys, 0 out of 10. It's like, then turn off sticky keys. Or don't play on Windows, you know. But I know most people play on Windows. Anyway, So yeah, like there are times when you're doing a lot of work but not making much progress, right? This is actually like, this isn't even software development, this is life. There are times when you'll work your ass off for months and you'll make very little progress, and then all of a sudden something happens and suddenly like everything shifts and you're suddenly making money, and then you go back to making no money, right? This is what life is like. Life has its ups and downs as well as software development, all right? So, we need to know design standards for new feature creation. You can't be completely loosey-goosey, right? You need to have some standards. And we need tested code to ensure changes won't break current features. Someone needs to be doing the code reviews on pull requests, right? Pull requests should be accompanied with automated testing, right? Contracting and startups are the worst offenders. Although contract gigs are the types of gigs that you will get probably starting off. Agile has become synonymous with programming artifacts only. To be effective, it must include time for requirements, design, refactoring, and testing, but Agile kind of doesn't want to give you any time to do that. Agile wants to give you time for developing the code itself and nothing else. Organizations need to give enough time for all of these activities. Remember that Agile only wants to minimize unnecessary work, not to prevent useful work, right? The question is convincing your boss that it's useful work. So, potential advantages, communication, single team, requirements. Is that a sentence that parses for you guys? I think what this sentence is trying to say is that because you have a single team and not multiple departments, communication is theoretically enhanced, and the through line from requirements to products is also more communication. Direct communications to the client is also not true because that goes through the Scrum, or the product guy from the Scrum diagram. All right, horizontal hierarchy. No manager to override concerns, unless there is a manager. All team members are equal contributors, but as we know from Animal Farm, some are more equal than others. And can anybody else think of any big advantages for Agile? Did they talk about that in your project management course? Like why? Yes?
You're able to pivot with, I forget the word, but depending on things outside of your control, such as if suddenly the program that you're using or the tool that you're using suddenly goes like legacy, or if something in the actual foundational purpose of a program gets shifted based on world events, it allows you to more easily pivot in a direction.
As opposed to just starting over. Yeah. Now, I will be on team classicism for just a moment and say that sometimes the changes are big enough that the correct thing to do is to start over, right? But yeah, and when you were saying, you know, some software becomes legacy, I was very tempted to interject. You mean like Windows 10? So, in summary, Agile is a blanket term for a number of project management styles. Most commonly used style in industry is Scrum, reaction to displeasure from an overly rigid corporate structure management styles. Corporate Scrum, moving a direction where it has the same issues, however. Yes?
Sorry, one more addition to Agile.
Yes.
Just as direct result of my co-op, one of the projects that I was working on was originally very wanted, but then in the process of development, when we were having it be interacted with certain groups that were basically testing it, what we found is that essentially no one liked the solution, and there was literally nothing else we could do to develop the solution further, so that within our company it would be accepted and wanted, and so the entire project ended up getting entirely scrapped. Because as the agile development was going on, we were able to present things that were capable of being used, and that gave us space to see that the people who were supposed to be using it and the people who were supposed to want to use it absolutely hated it.
That's a great story. Yeah, I can see that. Because you're talking to the customers at an earlier phase, you get an earlier read on whether your product's any good or not, right? And unfortunately, sometimes businesses as well as people can be subject to the sunk cost fallacy, right? You guys know the sunk cost fallacy? Yeah? Some people? Everybody? No? So the sunk cost fallacy is when, if you've put a lot of money into something, right, you have an inclination to stick with that thing, even if there's no reasonable prospect of it working. A good example of this is actually gambling. So if you imagine you're at a casino and you're sitting in front of a slot machine and you have put, $5,000 into a slot machine. I just realized as I said that I'm giving away how much I think an unreasonable amount of money to do on anything is. My number is $5,000. That's how much I think is an unreasonable amount of money to do anything with, especially gambling. So if you put $5,000 into a slot machine, if you put $20 into a slot machine, playing the slot machine again because, well, I put this much into it, it's got to give me something soon, right? That is sunk cost fallacy, right? Because there is no larger probability of you winning that slot machine on the 5,001st play as it did on play number 1. But people will be more inclined to dump money into something they've already dumped money into, right? So, if you can avoid sunk cost, that's also very good life advice. Although I don't think it's particularly good relationship advice. Some people try to interpret it as relationship advice. I don't think that that's the case, but it certainly applies to situations that apply to money. So, corporate Scrum, moving in a direction where it has the same issues. I mean, corporate Scrum starts to sound more and more like crunch time, always in crunch time to me. Failures in widespread adoption should never be used as an excuse for not doing useful work. Of course, nothing should ever be used as an excuse for not doing useful work, except perhaps there is no useful work to do. And even then, you could probably find something half useful to do. Okay, any questions? Okay. In that case, I'm going to turn off the camera.